There's a connection between how well you hear and how well your brain ages, and until very recently, most doctors weren't discussing it. That silence wasn't because the evidence didn't exist. It did, and it was building for over a decade in observational studies. What changed is that in 2023 and 2024, two major pieces of research landed that made the connection impossible to ignore. One was a randomized controlled trial, the highest form of medical evidence we have. The other was a major report from a Lancet Commission that placed hearing loss at the top of a list you didn't know your hearing belonged on. If you or someone you love has been quietly turning up the television volume, asking people to repeat themselves in restaurants, or avoiding phone calls because voices are harder to follow than they used to be, this video is for you. I'm going to walk you through what the research actually shows, what it doesn't show, and what the current evidence-based recommendations actually are, because this is one of the clearer stories in aging research right now, and it's one where doing something about it appears to genuinely matter. I'm Steven, and this channel translates recent peer-reviewed research into practical information for adults over 60. If this is useful, please subscribe. And when we get to the practical section, I'd love to hear in the comments whether hearing loss is something you've been putting off addressing, because you're very much not alone, and the reasons why matter. Let me start with a number that should get your attention. In July 2024, the Lancet Commission on Dementia Prevention, Intervention, and Care published its updated report. This is one of the most influential documents in the field, a standing commission of researchers from around the world who periodically synthesize the evidence on what actually contributes to dementia risk and what might reduce it. Their 2024 update identified 14 modifiable risk factors for dementia. Modifiable meaning you can potentially do something about them, unlike genetics or age itself. Of those 14 risk factors, hearing loss was ranked as the single largest one. The Commission estimated that hearing loss alone accounts for approximately 7% of all dementia cases globally. To put that in context, it was ranked as a larger contributor than smoking, larger than high blood pressure, larger than physical inactivity, larger than social isolation, larger than depression. All of those matter. But hearing loss, according to the current best synthesis of the evidence, appears to matter most. And it's the risk factor that has historically received the least clinical attention. So the first honest question is, how do researchers even know this? The link between hearing loss and dementia has been studied for over a decade, largely through observational studies. These studies follow large groups of people over years and track who develops cognitive decline or dementia and what characteristics predicted it. The consistent finding across many of these studies is that people with untreated hearing loss show faster cognitive decline and higher rates of eventual dementia than people with normal hearing. One estimate that appears frequently in this literature is that untreated hearing loss is associated with roughly a 94% increased risk of developing dementia in older adults. Now, observational studies have real limits, and this is where I want to be careful with you. When you see two things linked in observational research, hearing loss and dementia, for example, you cannot be certain that one causes the other. There are three possibilities researchers have to sort out. Hearing loss might genuinely contribute to dementia. Dementia might be causing the hearing loss, or an early undetected neurological process might cause both. Or some third factor. Cardiovascular disease, diabetes, aging blood vessels might independently cause both, making them appear linked when neither is causing the other. That's the fundamental problem observational research can't solve on its own. That's why the ACHIEVE trial mattered so much. Published in The Lancet in July 2023, ACHIEVE was the first large, well-designed, randomized controlled trial specifically testing whether treating hearing loss could actually slow cognitive decline. Researchers took 977 older adults, aged 70 to 84, all of them with untreated mild to moderate hearing loss, and all of them cognitively healthy at the start. They randomly assigned half of them to receive comprehensive hearing treatment, hearing aids, professional fitting, ongoing counseling with an audiologist, and the other half to receive a general health education program that didn't address hearing. Then they followed both groups for 3 years and tracked their cognitive function carefully. Here's what the trial found, and I want to give you the honest version because it's more nuanced than the headline. Across the full study population, the hearing intervention group did not show a statistically significant reduction in cognitive decline compared to the control group at 3 years. That on its own might sound disappointing. But when the researchers looked at a specific subgroup, participants who were at higher risk of cognitive decline to begin with, based on factors like cardiovascular health, the effect was dramatic. In that higher risk group, the hearing intervention slowed cognitive decline by 48% over 3 years. Nearly half. That's a remarkable result, and it's been reinforced by follow-up analyses. In the highest risk quartile of participants, cognitive decline in the hearing intervention group was about 58% slower than in the control group. What Achieve appears to be telling us is that treating hearing loss may not equally benefit everyone, but for the people who need it most, older adults with cardiovascular risk factors, the very population most at risk for cognitive decline, the intervention appears to make a substantial difference. The trial has real limits worth being honest about. 3 years is a relatively short follow-up for a condition that develops over decades. The intervention was intensive, involving audiologist visits and comprehensive fitting, which is different from the reality most people experience when they walk into a big box store and buy an over-the-counter hearing aid. And the healthier subgroup of participants, those recruited from the general community rather than from the cardiovascular study, did not show the same benefit, which suggests the effect may be specific to certain populations rather than universal. All of that is important context, and none of it undermines the core finding. For the right group of older adults, treating hearing loss appears to genuinely slow cognitive decline in a way researchers can measure. More recent research has continued to reinforce and extend this picture. A study published in JAMA Neurology using data from the Framingham Heart Study followed nearly 3,000 participants for up to 20 years. It found that among adults under 70 with hearing loss, using hearing aids was associated with a 61% reduction in dementia risk over that long follow-up period. The effect wasn't seen in adults who first developed hearing loss after 70, which suggests that earlier treatment may matter more than later treatment. A point worth pausing on if you're in your 50s or 60s and have been putting off dealing with hearing changes. So let me get into the harder question. Why would this be? Why would something that seems to be about your ears end up affecting your brain? The current thinking centers on several possible mechanisms, and honestly, the researchers themselves are still working out which ones matter most. The first is what's often called cognitive load. When your hearing is compromised, your brain has to work much harder to make sense of speech. Every conversation becomes an active decoding exercise instead of a passive intake. Over years, that additional effort may leave fewer cognitive resources available for other things like memory formation and problem solving. Your brain, in a sense, becomes overworked just trying to hear. The second mechanism is social withdrawal. This one is particularly important because it's often invisible until it's advanced. When hearing becomes difficult, people gradually stop going to noisy restaurants, stop making phone calls, stop attending group gatherings, stop participating in the kinds of complex social interactions that keep the brain engaged. Social isolation is itself a Lancet-recognized risk factor for dementia. So untreated hearing loss can contribute to dementia through the direct pathway of the ears themselves and also through the indirect pathway of the isolation it causes. The two effects compound. The third potential mechanism is structural. Some brain imaging studies have found that adults with untreated hearing loss show accelerated atrophy in the brain regions responsible for processing sound and language. The theory is that when those regions stop receiving normal input from the ears, they gradually shrink through disuse. Whether that atrophy directly causes broader cognitive decline or is a marker of something else is still being studied, but the imaging findings are consistent enough to take seriously. The reason all of this matters practically is that hearing loss, unlike many contributors to dementia, is genuinely something you can do something about. That's what makes it a modifiable risk factor, and that's what makes the current lack of treatment so striking. According to research reviewed in the Achieve study documents, hearing loss is present in roughly 65% of adults over age 60, but only a fraction of those people are actually being treated for it. Many older adults with meaningful hearing loss go years or decades without addressing it, often because they don't realize how significant the loss has become, because hearing aids carry a social stigma that's been slow to fade, because the cost and complexity feel overwhelming, or because their doctor never brought it up. Here's what I'd suggest as practical next steps, based on what the current evidence supports. First, if you suspect your hearing has changed, take it seriously earlier rather than later. The Framingham data suggests that earlier intervention may produce larger benefits than later intervention. If you're in your 50s or 60s and you've noticed that voices are harder to follow, that background noise is more disorienting than it used to be, that you're avoiding certain social situations, those are signals worth acting on now, not in 5 years. Second, Ask your primary care doctor for a hearing referral, or self-refer to an audiologist. A proper hearing evaluation, an audiogram performed by a licensed audiologist, is very different from an online hearing test or a screening at a retail store. The evaluation itself is often covered by Medicare when referred by a physician, and it will tell you specifically what kind and degree of hearing loss you have, which is information you need to make good decisions. Third, if hearing aids are recommended, know that the landscape has genuinely changed in the last few years. Since 2022, the FDA has permitted over-the-counter hearing aids to be sold in the United States for adults with mild to moderate hearing loss. That has significantly reduced costs and access barriers compared to what previous generations of seniors faced. Prescription hearing aids from an audiologist remain the gold standard, especially for more significant losses, but the availability of well-designed over-the-counter options means cost is a much smaller barrier than it used to be. The Achieve trial specifically used comprehensive audiologist-led fitting, and that's the model most strongly supported by the current evidence, but even less comprehensive treatment appears to be better than no treatment at all. Fourth, address the broader picture at the same time. The Lancet Commission's report is a reminder that dementia risk is multifactorial. Hearing is the single largest modifiable factor they identified, but the other 13 also matter: physical activity, cardiovascular health, blood pressure control, avoiding social isolation, protecting against head injury. Treating hearing loss is a large lever, but it's most effective as part of a broader approach to healthy aging. I want to close with a note of honest optimism. Dementia risk research can feel discouraging because most of the risk factors that get discussed, genetics, age itself, are things you can't do anything about. Hearing loss is different. It's genuinely modifiable. The treatment exists. The technology has improved dramatically, and the newest randomized trial evidence suggests that treating it can measurably slow cognitive decline in the people at highest risk. That's not a promise, and it's not a cure. But it's one of the most actionable pieces of evidence-based information available in this space right now, and it's a conversation worth having with your doctor at your next visit. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you had your hearing checked recently? If you use hearing aids, has your experience been what you hoped? Your responses genuinely shape what I cover next. If this was useful, please subscribe. Next week I'll be covering the specific vitamin deficiency most strongly linked to cognitive symptoms in adults over 60, one where the evidence for treatment is actually much stronger than for most supplements. You won't want to miss it. Take care of yourself.